Thank you, everyone, for your attention. To dive into this session today, before we start, I'd just like to say a few quick words. Earlier, we heard in the one of the presentation by the Interpol presenter, Neil Jackson, who talked about a projection of about 23 billion cybercrime proceeds that are expected to hit in 2027, and a big component of that is ransomware, and how Interpol is working with some organizations to initiate some efforts in countering the ransomware threat. And as we've seen earlier as well, a couple of days earlier, in fact, Singapore has also reported like a ransomware attack on one of its government agencies, right, the home teams. So the threat is not going away anytime soon, and really it was amplified since the WannaCry incident about 10 years ago. It was amplified during the COVID pandemic. Of course, we heard about Colonial Pipelines and how the organization had to pay, I think it was $4.4 million to the attackers. And then after that, obviously, we came to the Russian-Ukraine war, which further escalated the threat. And now we have like not just a single sort of ransomware incident, we have double extortion, triple extortion, we have crackdowns on the ransomware gangs, but then yet they regroup. And now we have Lockbit, which is a very prominent ransomware gang. And some of these underground services have splintered into various ransomware as a service, phishing as a service, access as a service, all sorts of cybercrime as a service modules, right? So the threat is not going away anytime soon. So for today's session, we will dive into 4 broad themes in the next 30 minutes, or rather 28 minutes. So the first thing we will look at is we'll set the context, look at the current ransomware threat landscape, and then second, we'll look at some mitigation and incident response strategies, and then we'll take a quick glimpse at some of the regulations and the law sort of implications that we all need to be aware of when responding to some of these ransomware threat demands. And then finally, we'll look at some future emerging technologies and how that's going to affect the threat landscape as well as our defense strategies. So without further ado, so let's kick off on the first theme, the cyber threat landscape. And if I may go to the first speaker on my left, Michael. So what are kind of the sort of important developments and trends that you see, over the last 10 years in terms of the ransomware threat landscape that the audience should be aware of?
Yeah, thanks everyone. So I find that ransomware, among all the other threat landscape, to a certain extent, is not the most high value item. There are a lot of other threat that is sort of up there. But ransomware is something very prevalent, because I think last year we do hear a lot of local examples. Even a law firm in Singapore that I shall not name, but they are attacked with a ransomware incident, and of course in Singapore our stance on ransomware is you can't pay ransom, right? But then that puts a company in a very difficult position. So if you can't pay the ransom and your data is at ransom, and then of course it may contain confidential client information as well. So how do you deal with it, right? So the first thought is, do I have a backup of the data? Can I do without that data that is being held ransom? So this way, organizations now are waking up and say that, that's important. If one day we have no access to our data, then we must have another way to access that data. So a backup, right? But then again, when it's held ransom, is it really that simple? Is the threat actor really just coming into your system and then just blocking your access? Obviously we like to think that way, but in reality it's not. So if they have access into your database, access into your system, obviously they have access into your data as well. So have they actually taken the data out, and then harvest it for later purposes as well? So that's something that the organization will need to think about in a ransomware situation. So Michael, you brought up a few good points about
threat actors taking the data to maybe harvest later, and then we'll come to that point later when we talk about quantum and how that is going to really accelerate or put a focus on that strategy by the threat actors. And then the other point you brought up is also backups, which will tackle it as part of the incident response or cyber defense strategy. So thanks for that. And I believe, Paulo, you have some thoughts in terms of the payments. I think Michael talked very briefly about the ransom payments. So you have some thoughts on that.
Yeah, actually, the way ransomware developed is, something that was derived from what we experienced last time without technology, without digitalization. It's basically keeping something valuable hostage, right? So when last time you would probably have the hostage situation. It's basically keeping now your data hostage. But as what Michael shared, it's really not that simple. In the first place, it's not going to be one of the low-hanging fruits for any criminal, because first of all, just like when you rob a bank and probably have some hostage situation, you have to negotiate, right? First of all, how much do you need to actually get that money out? And now, even though you digitalize it, the threat of ransomware has become more prevalent, even though it was probably, it started off in the late 80s. So what happened was, technology was not that ready back then. Payment systems were not as advanced. I believe they still used mail to send in some cash payments. So that was a history. Now everything is online payments, digitalization, you have cryptocurrency, and it just makes it easier to hide who the attacker is, so anonymization is there. But at the same time, it makes it also a bit more complex for the victims. So if you're a victim and you're not really into cryptocurrency, you have to do a lot of setup. And for the criminals, I heard they also do. They set up some help desk support for their victims so that it makes it easier for them to also pay the ransom, because otherwise they won't get it in any other way. So again, it's not that simple, and there could be better threats that they can, or other attacks they can actually do. So, but in any case you do get hit, backup is your only resort, because in the first place, there's a lot of cybersecurity awareness that's being held out there. So people are actually encouraged not to pay up because of so many factors. One is you don't have any guarantees that you actually can get your data back. Second is, if they actually did exfiltration, even though you get your data back, they can still blackmail you with whatever data they actually harvested. Yeah, so that's the second one. And thirdly, even if you pay, then you'll be one of the easier targets next time. There's no guarantee that they won't hit you again, or other people will try to get back at you because, hey, this company or this organization actually paid up. Maybe you can also get it again. Yeah. So basically, if you have deep pockets to pay, first of all, it's loose change, but you can multiply that with the number of attacks you'll get.
Yeah, I think to pay or not to pay, that's a big question, isn't it? We'll come to that later in the regulations and the law sort of topic, to address this from perhaps a legal perspective, right? Ian, sorry, you have something to add.
Yeah, so I wanted to sort of add on to that, right? So the paying or not paying, so I call it shameware, which is like double extortion. So they've created techniques where if you don't pay, they'll say like, okay, if you don't pay within 7 days, I'm going to start publishing the payroll data of all your executives. So they know to add pressure points, into the equation. I think that, looking at the crowd, right, one assumption that you guys might think is, oh, my company's so small, they won't target me. The answer is that's absolutely untrue. This morning you heard from Interpol that ransomware, the majority of that business is ransomware as a service with an affiliate program. So what that opens up is that a lot of people with all kinds of different skill set can now attack all types of companies. And so it's no wonder if you look at the stats, you'll see small, medium enterprise, big companies, everyone's affected by ransomware, and it's not necessarily going away anytime soon. Gen AI creates a much bigger scale, a much bigger speed and even novel attacks that, ransomware in the form of deep fakes. So I think that it's important to know that these ransomware people, they operate like Ocean's 11. So they've got a team that essentially creates the exploit. Once they see a vulnerability, which, we talk about backup, but patching is key. Because they see a vulnerability that's open, then they start developing a tool for it, the ransomware as a service. Then other people will use it. And then there's another team, Ocean's 11, right? Someone climbs the roof, someone opens the lock, right? So another team is specializing on stealing credentials everywhere. They're harvesting credentials. So they buy some credentials from this guy, they take the CVE exploit from this guy, and then they take another phishing expert from this guy, and then they start blasting, the targets. So all to say that people of companies of all levels will be affected by ransomware, and these guys have an economy of scale, and they have convenience of help desk support and all the other support that comes with the ransomware as a service. So,
if I may add to that as well, because this is what you call a multi-pronged approach, right? Because ransomware in itself, as I said, is not really something that you will have a quick return for the attacker, but it has to have like the data breach that happened, or it has to have some kind of DOS attack probably to cut off certain services. So it has to be this Ocean's 11 team that they have to set up. But ransomware in itself is just one part of it.
Yeah, so in case you guys are wondering why there's a reference to Ocean's 11, that's because Ian is also a filmmaker himself, so he's very switched on in terms of the tactics some of these threat actors deploy. So talking about, you mentioned multi-pronged approach. So talking about cyber defense, now we come to the next theme, cyber defense, right? How we mitigate some of these threats, right? So there's been a lot of discussions about we have to have also defense in that. We have to adhere to some best practices in terms of the risk management, cyber risk management frameworks out there, network segmentation, access controls, all that. So I think a lot of our audience are probably very switched on in terms of some of these best practices. But when it comes to ransomware, what is the sort of maybe some underestimated controls that, maybe perhaps our audience is not aware of? And I'd like to hand that question to Ian because,
Sure.
we're one of the multinationals, so you probably have a lot of experience, in this area.
100%. So before coming to Asia, I was a CISO in the States for 15 years. So I've had to deal with ransomware directly myself. Now, I will tell you, in terms of defenses, it's fairly unique, right? So a couple of things that I'm sure we'll talk about backup, and I earlier mentioned patch management. But let me give you a couple of other more novel ideas that you probably have never heard of, which I've actually implemented in the past. Okay, so majority of the ransomware that I see today starts with phishing. Right? So the ransomware as a service, they have a huge phishing campaign. The phishing campaigns are able to exploit the endpoint, and then from there they get a foothold, they do command and control, and then they spread, and then the end begins for you. But one of the key things that I did in the past was that I worked with my CTO and we deployed a Chromebook strategy, right, for my employees. Not all of 100% of my people, but when I looked at my employee base, a lot of them were just using browser-based applications, for Word, for email, for et cetera, but we give them a fully loaded PC. Now, a fully loaded PC, for those of you who don't know, has about 40,000 CVEs per year. There's so many vulnerabilities on a PC system. So, and when I looked at a Chromebook, it was 40 a year. By 40 versus 40,000? That's 10,000 orders of magnitude in terms of vulnerability. So one of the key things that I did to reduce the attack surface in my environment without buying an additional tool and reducing the cost of my enterprise was, instead of a PC, I gave not all, but a majority of the people that, Chromebooks. So there are many strategies. So that's one. And the other thing you have to know is you always have to be implementing defense in depth, right? So reducing the amount of threats is key, right? Phishing filters, because that's how they come in. Having a strong threat hunting team to look for lateral movements and things like that within your organization is key. And backup, having a solid sort of backup strategy that has a special focus on how to protect it from ransomware attack is absolutely bar none, fundamental.
Right, sorry, Paulo, I was going to ask you about...
Well, to add to that as well, I mean, you talk about the team, but part of that solution is really going back to basics. So preparing yourself, how do you prevent such attacks from happening? So aside from the anti-malware, anti-ransomware, antivirus, you would also have all the EDR protection and also the IPS, IDS. Because sometimes it may not fall under the purview of your anti-malware to be able to detect. Such anomalous activities in general should be able to be detected by these solutions. And if that fails, then you have your additional SIEM systems, which you try to get information, threat intel information as well from different locations, or at least similar industries, because most likely when a similar peer from another company gets attacked, they will probably have the same modus operandi for your own company. And I think having also the proper preparation for any incident is important. So your incident response plan has to be in place. And how do you actually respond to an attack? How do you analyze whether and even detect what's happening? And once that is detected and analyzed, then how do you contain it? So you can use your segmentation, and then you have the proper defense in depth that you put in place. The next step is how do you eradicate what is existing in your current network, and then of course once you contain and eradicated it, how do you recover through the proper backups that you already established. So I think that's mainly the incident response plan that you have to set up. Each company is going to be different. There's no one size fits all kind of solution. But I would say the approach should still be a risk-based approach, because then you try to prioritize what really should be protected more compared to those that are really not so important to your company.
Yeah, I just want to take a lead from that actually. So in terms of defense, my approach would be more data governance, which Paulo mentioned, so what you need to protect more than the others. So I think it's a very effective method, right? Because not all data are equal. So there are certain data that can really bring down the organization, right? So the people, the C-suites or people who has this access to data needs to know that. I just give you an analogy, right? So let's say in our house, right? So we have our crown jewels, expensive jewelry, watches. We don't leave it lying around the house or in the front yard, right? So in order to break into let's say my house, then there'll be a gate. Then from the gate, there's your front door, and then maybe to the bedroom door and to the safe. So your safe, the last is where you put all your crown jewel. So a lot of organizations don't do that. Even the intern who joined the company, you have access to a lot of information, So, but you start compartmentalize your data according to what's most important, or what the hacker wants the most, to do a reverse thinking, right? So, and then you protect it in a very different way, or add more layers of security. So even if they can enter into your front door or your front porch, what they're getting is just email invites, lunch appointments, and a lot of spam, right? But the really confidential information should be governed in a very separate container and different security measures, right? So I think that's definitely a good way to defend.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of aspects in terms of mitigation and incident response that we can deep dive into, but I'm really conscious of the time. We have only 11 minutes left. So I'd just like to kind of go into the third theme, if I may, about regulations and law enforcement and compliance of legal regulations. So Michael, you talk about data governance, right? But when it comes to ransomware, and obviously when there's a breach, right, there's a lot of breach reporting obligations and about, what kind of information has been leaked, personal data and all that. So in terms of regulations and breach reporting, what are the kind of key considerations that organizations should be aware of immediately?
Yeah, I mean, I've handled a few of this situation. I think the biggest question is what's the extent of the breach, right? Because, for example, PDPA says that if you have more than 500 data that is being breached, then you have to do a reporting. But then again, how do you know whether there is 500 or more, right? So that's where you need to, again, know your data, get in the experts or maybe get your IT person to know, to assume that in the database that's compromised, how much of this information has personal information, So let's say if it's below the threshold, then of course you have more time to deal with it, not just 72 hours, right? Yeah.
And I think also from the legal standpoint, right, the onus is really on sometimes the victims to make the report, assuming certain numbers, because you can't really verify 100% whether it's below 500 or over 500. So I think it's really about weighing the risk. I think normally you tend to err on the side of caution. So it's mostly better to report than to leave it out and find out later that you actually were non-compliant. But at the same time, I think more than the legal aspect is the enforcement. Are there laws out there and cooperation in terms of the government bodies that actually are trying to work together to actually chase people? Because normally if you get hit, it's normally from another location. And trying to chase the perpetrators is going to be a big headache. Are you willing to go through that headache? And also going to be in terms of the resources that you need to actually trace them down. You might even be going after the wrong people in the first place. So it's definitely a challenge, but there has to be a solution that we at least start building, because otherwise, just give up. Yeah, and the best way is just to prepare yourself for any incident, and then you just try to fix it.
Yeah. Oh, sorry.
Oh yeah. So my comment is this, right? Generally, the regulations around this falls into two broad categories. One is around data privacy protection, mainly of consumer data, and then the other one is around data security guidelines, mainly for ability and critical infrastructure and what have you. But I have to give you this warning again, as a practicing CISO, right? That if you or your board focus on the compliance aspect of these data regulations, you're actually doing minimum-based security, because they're trying to lower the minimum-based security so that more people can jump over. So what I say is that just because you have good compliance does not equal that you have good security. The way that you should do security was what both Michael and Paulo alluded to, is start with what's consequential to your organization and work your way backwards. Because if you do good security right, you should get compliance for free. Because all those compliance laws are really directed at protecting your environment or protecting consumer or confidential data.
Yeah, I just want to jump in quickly. Again, it's not all equal, you see, because it depends on what industry you're in. If you're in the financial services, right, you're regulated by not just the PDPA, but also MAS. Then if you're a listed company, or if you're healthcare, medical information. So every industry has a difference.
But then again, it might even be too overwhelming to even start with, right? So just even meeting the compliance requirements already takes all your resources and even more. So I think people are actually struggling to cope with all these compliance requirements. That's why it's definitely something that they're just trying to achieve and break that that ceiling, the threshold of all that compliance requirement. But moving forward as well, it's going to be the human side, the people side, that's going to be the weakest link. And I think training your staff in general is very important. So getting everyone to cooperate and pitch in, do their part, because otherwise, that weakest link will break everyone else's efforts. Yeah.
I'm quite conscious of the time, 6 minutes. So I just want to touch very quickly on backups, right? So of course, all of you mentioned that backups is essential. What are the key, aspects people tend to underestimate when, to come to implement robust, resilient backups. Any thoughts on that?
Well, yeah, having handled IT infrastructures and systems, including backups for so many decades, it's basically one of the basic things you implement. We talk about like BCP even last time. Don't talk about cyber threats. Talk about a natural disaster, or nowadays you don't know when it's going to flood, or even when it's going to snow elsewhere. Being prepared for any pandemic, all these things requires a proper backup, because you also don't know when even the hardware will fail, out of, let's say, wear and tear. So having a proper backup requires a strategy. First of all, in terms of the media, how frequent you want to back up, how far back you want to back up. So in BCP terms or BCM, you normally want to define some basic metrics, like what is your RPO, recovery point objective, recovery time objective, to actually just bring back that point in time of the business back to normal, and of course to fully have it operational at the end of the day as business as usual. So again, it depends on your resources, what's your capability. The solutioning part of it will depend on the business side, because again, they determine what kind of data is really important to back up in the first place. Do you back up everything, lock, stock, and barrel, or you just want to back up just your crown jewels? Because, yeah, first of all, it takes a longer time to back up everything. Yeah? Even my photos on my own personal devices takes a long time to back up. So what more with their corporate data?
Yeah, I know I'm conscious in time, but I just want to jump in very quickly. I think we didn't have a chance to talk too much about ransomware management. So how do you manage it when you get an alert or someone tell you that your data is being held ransom for organization? So I have helped organization as a negotiator. So while we know that we are not going to pay, but negotiating is a good strategy, because when you start negotiating with them, then that gives you time, to quickly check on your backup. You may think that you can get it up in 24 hours, right? But can you really get everything up in 24 hours? No one knows until you really get it done, right? So, but in the meantime, we are negotiating, we are getting tidbits, we are throwing some carrots, and then finally your data backup is all up and say, no deal, right? So just these are things to think about. Sometimes engaging them may not be the worst strategy if you have your game plan in sight. Yeah?
Oh, right, okay. So I just want to open the floor up to the audience if you have any questions for our panelists. We have about 3 minutes left, so tons of time for questions. The gentleman over there.
Hey, just if you can spend some few sentences on how to secure the backups itself, because I think that's an increasing trend that the attackers knows about, and too when you were talking about the pressure points, right? So they try to delete even your backups first, or at the same time, so the pressure is even bigger, and then make you pay. So if you can, a few words on it.
Sure. Well, I'll give you a short answer to that question because of the time. So because of ransomware, there's a whole new breed of vendors that play in this space that are focused on ransomware-resistant backup and recovery capabilities. My advice is for you to take a look at their capabilities, do the POCs, etc., and compare that to your current backup strategy. So that's one. The other thing that I do want to mention is also that a lot of the data that you're backing up, in my experience, is there's a lot of duplication, especially in consequential data. So in California, where I was a CISO, it was social security number. And when I approached the business and said, look, do we need all this social security number? The shocking thing was, out of the millions that we had, we only really needed 500,000. Right, and instead of doing all the other stuff that we did to back up and what have you, I went after tokenizing those social security number in my organization so that the numbers became meaningless and it's safely kept in another vendor. This was LexisNexis, the vendor that kept the real socials. So there are strategies to deal with these types of situations above and beyond just the common way that we deal with it. You just have to think through what's consequential and then attack the problem intelligently.
Identify your crown jewels, right? And work backwards from there. Any more questions? No, okay. So, right, okay, so very quickly, right? We have only 1 minute left. So if we could very quickly touch on the point of, sorry, Michael, earlier you brought up the point of Harvard's now decrypt later, right? And you are, of course, a quantum head of association here in Singapore. So can you tell us very quickly about, this quantum threat and what it means in terms of ransomware actors potentially harvesting the data for decrypting later?
Okay. So as you know that there's this quantum computing that is coming up. I mean, so once the thesis is once the technology is matured, then the current RSA, ECC type of encryption technology can be breached. So the password is no longer safe. But that has not happened yet. It could be 20 years, 10 years, or even 5 years down the track. So there's still a long way to go. And then there's also a lot of organizations are starting PQC, QKD, postcode sort of measures to ensure that the data is safe. But a lot of hackers right now, they are actually harvesting all this information because even if they get your data, it might be password protected, right? So they are not able to see what's inside. So they are harvesting it until the technology is matured enough to decrypt it, and then hopefully then they can use the information for personal gain or financial gain as well. Yeah.
Right. Sorry.
Yeah. So to add to that as well, I think minimizing your attack surface makes it more difficult for any attacker to get in, because closing all your ports and making sure that you only have the proper software in each and everyone's device. At the same time, education, I think, is key for everyone because, as what Ian mentioned, the first point of attack is really about through phishing. So that's a kill chain that will happen to try and first get some of the payload in, and then everything just trickles down from there.
Yeah, I guess my last words are, don't try to boil the ocean. The problem with cybersecurity is you can't actually secure everything, right? So you need to focus on what's consequential to your organization, build a strategy around that, and once you've done the protection, the second part of it is be vigilant because all these things, they will continue to evolve, the threats will continue to evolve, the tactics will evolve, so you need to always be vigilant. Like coming here and listening to some of this real world advice, right? That's being vigilant.
Yeah, so the threat is not going anytime soon, and it's evolving, as Ian's saying. It's always going to be a cat and mouse game, right? So we have to pay attention to the basics, best practices, cyber hygiene, which I'm sure a lot of you in the audience have already been practicing, and backups as well, strategies around that. And there's one topic that we didn't touch on, which is, to pay or not to pay, but that's for another day, I think. All right, so
that's a long topic.
Yeah, that's a long topic.
Well, first of all, do you have something to pay for? I mean, do you have enough money to pay the ransom?
Yeah, that's right, and also preparing your cryptocurrency account, in case you need to pay. So, anyways, thank you very much for your attention and for your time. I hope that you learned something from this panel discussion. Thank you very much.
Thank you, guys.
I request